Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Trumbore with your nightly review for Thursday, March 28. I forgot my other glasses. It is 4:03 p.m. Eastern Time. Historic day. Dow Jones finished up 49 points to 14,575. S&P 5, that's a new all-time high for the Dow. S&P 500 finished up 6 points to 1569. Finally, an all-time high, closing high for the S&P. And NASDAQ finished up 11 points to 3267 for all three indexes, a gain of about 0.3 to 0.4% on the day. So we completed a terrific first quarter, and I scrambled. That's why I forgot the other glasses. So December 31st, closing numbers, and where we finished today. And the Dow Jones is actually settling out at 14,577. But the Dow for the quarter gained about 11%, which I haven't seen officially, but might be the best first quarter since 1987, which is not a good sign because 1987 ended with a crash. S&P finished up 10% for the quarter. NASDAQ about 8%. So, just to show you, oil finished at 97.10 versus 91.70. Gold closed today at 15.96, 16.75 for December 31st, and the 10-year Treasury finished last year at 1.76%, 1.85 this year. European markets were up fractionally. London up 0.4%, Paris up 0.5%, Frankfurt up 0.1%. German February retail sales came in up 0.4% over January from a year earlier. Sales were actually down 2.2%. Germany's seasonally adjusted unemployment rate for March was unchanged at 6.9%. Germany's 10-year Bund hit its lowest level since August 3rd at 1.25%. Spain's 10-year is at 5.06%. Italy's at 4.76%. Very little change from yesterday. The euro improved only slightly, and I mention all of these in the slight changes because the news out of Cyprus you would think would have meant more in a positive way for the European markets, both stocks and bonds. Cyprus ended up being an orderly depression for one day. Restrictions on cash withdrawals, money transfers, and the movement of cash in and out of Cyprus could remain in place for a month, the foreign minister says. Ioannis Kasselidis said capital controls would be lifted gradually, appearing to contradict earlier estimates that curbs would end in days. Earlier, the president of Cyprus, Anastasiades, praised Cypriots who queued in orderly fashion for their cash, with the banks finally reopening today. He hailed the country's maturity and responsibility. Withdrawals over 300 euros are banned. In some places there were more journalists, however, than depositors. The stock exchange remained closed and won't reopen until after Easter. Travelers leaving the country will only be allowed to take 1,000 euros with them. The foreign minister said the controls would be in place about a month. Many economists say multiple months. The unprecedented restrictions represent a profound breach of an important principle of the European Union. That principle holds that capital, as well as people and trade, should be able to move freely across internal borders. However, the European Commission said member states could introduce capital controls in certain circumstances and under strict conditions on grounds of public policy or public security. But the European Commission added the free movement of capital should be reinstated as soon as possible. For Cyprus, the pain is just beginning, despite the calm pictures. Remember, the government had to approve of an austerity package with major layoffs as part of the bailout. In Slovenia, the next target, Prime Minister Alenka Bratušek, in her first major policy speech since taking office, told Parliament her week-long government would rebuild ailing banks and improve state finances that are in bad shape, so the country won't become the 6th Euro member to need aid. Bratušek's lack of specifics on how to avoid foreign support helped push the country's benchmark bonds to an all-time high in yield, at a time when Slovenia needs to tap the bond markets. Bratušek said, Slovenia won't need aid. We can do this on our own. Our banking system is stable and safe, and comparisons with Cyprus aren't valid. Deposits here are safe, and the government is guaranteeing them. Timothy Ash, chief emerging markets economist at Standard Bank in London, said Slovenia has its problems, and if the Eurozone had not completely messed up the Cyprus bailout, it could have got through under its own steam. Now, though, all bets are off, and it seems increasingly likely that a bailout will be required. Slovenia's biggest lender, Ljubljanska, reported a loss of 275 million euros in 2012. That was the 4th straight year of losses there. In a late development, like in the last 20 minutes, Pierluigi Bersani, Italy's Democratic Party leader, failed in his attempt to muster parliamentary support for his proposed center-left government, leaving the country's prolonged search for a new administration in the hands of the head of state, 87-year-old President Giorgio Napolitano. A statement from Napolitano's office said he would act without delay to take initiatives that would allow him to personally sound out possible developments. The Financial Times reported this was interpreted by some political analysts as indicating that Mr. Napolitano would move quickly, perhaps within 24 hours, to nominate a prime minister. That could be somebody from outside of Parliament. Perhaps Alberto Tomba, the skier. The government would have a narrow mandate to reform Italy's unpopular electoral law and pass emergency measures to try to shift the economy out of its recession, but within months, Italians will be back to the polls. However, then it could just be another hung parliament. This is going to go on for months, sports fans. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, whose members are mostly developed nations, warned that a meaningful recovery will elude the Eurozone until at least the second half of next year. The OECD expects the three largest Eurozone economies, Germany, France, and Italy, however, to avoid an outright contraction, growing by an annualized rate of 0.4% in the first quarter and 1%, again annualized, in the second quarter. But that's because of Germany. The OECD is rather optimistic, expecting the German economy to expand by 2.3% in the first quarter and 2.6% in the second. However, it says the French economy will contract in the first quarter by 0.6% before growing by 0.5% in the second, while Italy is expected to shrink in the first and second quarters by 1.6% and 1% respectively. The UK should avoid a triple-dip recession, growing by 0.5% in the first quarter. The OECD says of the United States that growth will be 3.5% in the first quarter and 2% in the second. Today it was announced that the final revision on fourth quarter GDP was 0.4%. Japan's economy is likely to grow by 3.2% and 2.2%. The OECD said overall, among the 7 biggest economies in the world, not including China, growth would be 2.4% in the first quarter. That's versus a contraction of 0.5% in the fourth quarter. Japan's central bank governor, Haruhiko Kuroda, told Parliament that the government's vast and growing debt is not sustainable, and that a loss of confidence in state finances could have a very negative impact on the entire economy. He was just installed as the Bank of Japan governor, and he's pledging to consider extending the maturity of bond purchases. Their equivalent of QE3, the 20-year bond in Japan dropped to a yield of 1.41%, the 10 years around 0.5%. Ours is 1.85%. Meanwhile, Japan's retail sales in the month of February fell more than forecast, 2.3% from a year earlier. But the figures also show that retail sales in February rose 1.6% from January, so that's a good sign. One analyst told BBC News, "We are seeing more optimism with the Japanese consumers and households. They are now hopeful that Shinzo Abe and his policies will help revive the Japanese economy." South Korea cut its growth forecast for the second time in 3 months amid a slowdown in exports. The Finance Ministry now expects the economy to grow by just 2.3% in 2013. It grew by 2% in 2012. Tensions continue to rise on the Korean Peninsula. The U.S. sent 2 B-2 stealth nuclear-capable bombers to South Korea today from Missouri, a rather lengthy trip, and dropped dummy bombs on a training range on an island off the South Korean coast in a signal of Washington's commitment to deter aggression. Bruce Klingner, an analyst at the Heritage Foundation, said discerning bluster from actual North Korean intent is always difficult, but recent actions suggest greater potential for another attack on South Korean military and civilian targets, citing very specific threats against South Korean military units based on islands off the west coast of the peninsula. Meanwhile, that link I told you of yesterday, the industrial complex called Kaesong, did stay open today, despite the fact they cut off the military hotline. South Korean workers were able to get into the complex in North Korea. About 400 of them did. If you heard that they shut it down and essentially held South Korean workers there, that would not be a good sign, but they're keeping it open for now. And from the South China Morning Post and University of Hong Kong Research, the mysterious new coronavirus that emerged in the Middle East and has killed 11 people is potentially more deadly than SARS, and as they put it, more promiscuous, able to infect many different species. The source of the new infection is still unknown, but the virus appears to have originated in bats. The World Health Organization announced yesterday that the disease had killed 2 more people, one in the United Arab Emirates and a Briton who had visited Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. The findings suggest the virus could cause widespread organ infection. It could attack the lower airway, liver, kidneys, and intestines, as well as tissue macrophages, cell clusters that eat bodily debris such as dead cells. Patients with the new coronavirus can suffer multiple organ failure, resulting in a high mortality rate of 56%, in contrast to 11% for SARS. Well, that's all for today. I'll be back with you on Monday. Read my week in review, posted early Saturday. Have a blessed Easter. Take care.